Brandon Smith, and we are live from the Forbidden Library. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to another Reading Sunday. Hello. Hello, Xnam. Continuing the adventures of the world's angriest man and his friends. Hello, Red Candy Guy. Hello. And howdy. Said you can't join early. Need to sleep early. Well, if you watch the VOD, then I hope you had a wonderful sleep. Until then, we will read. I would normally update my books until freedom, but we can't do that because I didn't read again this week. It happens. Sometimes I get into a little reading slump. We've done really good. And to be fair, I bought more comic books today. I shouldn't buy more comic books because I have a lot of comic books I haven't read. But there's a comic book shop that opened up and I want to support them, and I saw there was a one-shot Knuckles comic that's apparently for like the anniversary of him coming out, and then I saw one that was called Day of the Dead Girl that looked really good, and then I found one that called The Fade that looked really good, and then I went into that shop not intending to buy anything, and I came out with 3 whole things. But those 3 whole things cost as much as a normal manga volume did. So, I mean, I get 3 snippets of stories, of 3 different stories with the same amount I would get 1 manga volume. So, it's not that bad. We cope. For the movie or IDW, I don't think it was for the movie. It's the anniversary of Knuckles himself, I believe. Sleep well, Haldy. I'm pulling a 12-hour shift tomorrow, so I won't. Oh no, normal size Phantom. You should get some sleep too. You should pre-sleep, ready for your long shift. But I suppose then you would miss the drama. That is Wuthering Heights. How does one recap 44% of Wuthering Heights? I suppose I'll just go through the most recent events. So the most recent events is that Heathcliff decided being a pedo was for him. And he went and married Kathy's sister-in-law, Isabella Linton. Recap, dear God, why? Yeah, dear God, why? They came back to Wuthering Heights all married. And he's being an absolute dick to her. Because no one in Wuthering Heights is nice, and it's all awful, left, right, and centre, absolutely awful. He's hoping that he can use Isabella as some kind of tool to get at her brother, so that one day he can have Kathy. I don't know. But poor Isabella is trying not to let that happen because I don't know, she's a silly girl. She really should just let it happen. But her brother really does like Kathy for some reason. He has terrible... But then she had terrible taste for liking Heathcliff too. Really, the Lintons are the family of terrible taste. And it's gotten them both in horrible situations. Where he is in basically an emotionally abusive situation where he can't go against her, or she might have a fit and die. And she is in an abusive situation because Heathcliff doesn't give a shit about her. And she's basically left to fend for herself. When she is a pampered lady and is not used to these things. However, she did kind of girl boss on her first night there, to be fair. Just going into the going, I'm making supper now. And Joseph be like, oh, darn it, what you doing, lass? And all that sort of stuff. So, I have hope for Isabella, I do. I probably shouldn't, but I have hope she can grow. But then, we know in the future, we have Miss Heathcliff, who is probably gonna be Isabella's child. And unless she is the secret child of Kathy and Heathcliff, potentially. No, she's not. They're gonna have a son who's gonna marry Miss Isabella, and then the son's gonna die. Because Miss Heathcliff in the future was the daughter-in-law, not the actual daughter. So we have so much drama to get through. When Heathcliff has a child, will it be Isabella's or will it be Kathy's? We'll find out today in well, maybe not today. At some time in Wuthering Heights. Hello, exiled Chimera. You just missed the recap. Oh, thank you for subscribing, Claire. Well, lovely name. I like the name Claire. I had a friend in school when I was younger called Claire. What book is this? This is Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. I would give you the recap, but I just did, and it's very complicated. It's so very dramatic. Short version. Everyone sucks. Here we go. I protested against playing that treacherous part in my employer's house, and besides, I urged the cruelty and selfishness of his destroying Mrs. Linton's tranquillity for his satisfaction. The commonest occurrence startles her painfully, I said. She's all nerves, and she couldn't bear the surprise. I'm positive. Don't persist, sir. Oh, yeah, because he was like, hey, Nellie, if you could sneak me in to see Kathy, that would be great. But thing is, that could actually physically kill Kathy right now. I've read Blood Meriden and a few Warhammer books, but that's it mostly. This is a classic, is this 18th century literature? So it's big words, this one. But it's drama and we love it. She's all nerves and she couldn't bear the surprise. I'm positive. Don't persist, sir, or else I shall be obliged to inform my master of your designs, and he'll take measures to secure his house and its inmates from such unwarranted intrusions. I don't think they did that. I think that was 1600s. They probably spoke like thou shalt not pass. I actually found my old copy of this book when I was reading it for school. The little annotations I wrote on the side or something. Oh god, I can only imagine reading this for school. In that case, I'll take measures to secure you, woman, exclaimed Heathcliff. You shall not leave Wuthering Heights till tomorrow morning. It is a foolish story to assert that Catherine could not bear to see me, and as to surprising her, I don't desire it. You must prepare her. Ask her if I may come. You say she never mentions my name, and that I am never mentioned to her. To whom should she mention me if I am a forbidden topic in the house? She thinks you are all spies for her husband. Oh, I've no doubt she's in hell among you. I guess by your silence, as much as anything, what she feels. You say she is often restless and anxious looking. Is that proof of tranquillity? You talk of her mind being unsettled. How the devil could it be otherwise in her frightful isolation? And that insipid, paltry creature attending her from duty and humanity, from pity and charity. He might as well plant an oak in a flower pot and expect it to thrive, as imagine he can restore her vigour in the soil of his shallow cares. Restore her vigour in the soil of his shallow cares. Ah! Powerful! Let us settle it at once. Will you stay here, and I am to fight my way to Catherine over Linton and his footman, or will you be my friend, as you have been hitherto, and do what I request? Decide! Because there is no reason for my lingering another minute, if you persist in your stubborn ill nature. Well, Mr. Lockwood, I argued and complained and flatly refused him 50 times, but in the long run he forced me into an agreement. I engaged to carry a letter from him to my mistress, and should she consent, I promised to let him have intelligence of Linton's next absence from home, when he might come, and get in as he was able. I would be there, and my fellow servants would be equally out of the way. Was it right or wrong? I fear it was wrong. though expedient. I thought I prevented another explosion by my compliance, as I thought. Too, it might create a favourable crisis in Catherine's mental illness. And then I remembered Mr. Edgar's stern rebuke of my carrying tales, and I tried to smooth away all this quietude on the subject, my affirming, with frequent iteration, that betrayal of trust, if it merited so harsh an appellation, should be the last, notwithstanding my journey homeward was sadder than my journey hither, and many misgivings I had, ere I could prevail on myself to put the missive into Mrs. Linton's hand. But here is Kenneth. I'll go down and tell him how much better you are. My history is dree, as we say, and will serve to while away another morning. Bro, I want to continue the story. Miss Nelly, no, you can't stop the story there. Native gamer, still a member. Heck yeah. Hello, welcome. I need to change what that alert is. At least it's not right on my face anymore. That's great. Dree and dreary, I reflected as the good woman descended to receive the doctor, and not exactly of the kind which I should have chosen to amuse me, but never mind. I'll extract wholesome medicines from Mrs. Dean's bitter herbs. And firstly, let me beware of the fascination that lurks in Catherine Heathcliff's brilliant eyes. I should be in a curious taking if I surrendered my heart to that young person, and the daughter turned out a second edition of the mother. I see. Another week over, I am so many days nearer health and spring. I have now heard all my neighbours' history. No, we haven't! What happened? Or is he going to explain it? Is it... At different sittings, as the housekeeper could spare time from more important occupations. I'll continue it in her own words. Thank you! I should have kept reading, sorry. Only a little condensed. She is, on the whole, a very fair narrator, and I don't think I could improve her style. I mean, it's been fascinating to read so far, so we appreciate it. In the evening, she said, the evening of my visit to the Heights, I knew, as well as I saw him, that Mr. Heathcliff was about the place, and I shunned going out, because I still carried his letter in my pocket, and didn't want to be threatened or teased any more. I had made up my mind not to give it to my master. Till my master went somewhere. I could not guess how its receipt would affect Catherine. The consequence was that it did not reach her before the lapse of 3 days. The 4th was Sunday, and I brought it into her room after the family were gone to church. There was a man-servant left to keep the house with me, and we generally made a practice of locking the doors during the hours of service, but on that occasion the weather was so warm and pleasant that I set them wide open, and to fulfill my engagement, as I knew who would be coming, I told my companion that the mistress wished very much for some oranges, and he must run over to the village and get a few to be paid for on the morrow. He departed, and I went upstairs. Can you please leave out Joseph bits, though, Mr. Lockwood? Yes, Mr. Lockwood, please. We don't need any more Joseph in our lives. He's the Mr. Collins of this book. The character I cringe at when they come in, because then I have to read their dialogue, but for very different reasons. Mrs. Linton sat in a loose white dress, with a light shawl over her shoulders. In the recess of the open window, as usual, her thick, long hair had been partly removed at the beginning of her illness, and now she wore it simply combed in its natural tresses over her temples and neck. Her appearance was altered, as I had told Heathcliff, but when she was calm, there seemed unearthly beauty in the change. Can you read Wuthering Heights? We're reading it right now. But hello, Chio Mahima Kome? The flash of her eyes had been succeeded by a dreamy and melancholy softness. They no longer gave the impression of looking at the objects around her. They appeared always to gaze beyond and far beyond. You would have said out of this world, then the paleness of her face, its haggard aspect having vanished as she recovered flesh, and the peculiar expression arising from her mental state, though painfully suggestive of their causes, added to the touching interest which she awakened, and invariably to me, I know, to any person who saw her, I should think refuted more tangible proofs of convalescence, and stamped her as one doomed for decay. Yep, good news for you. We're doing it. A book lay spread on the sill before her, and the scarcely perceptible winds fluttered its leaves at intervals. I believe Linton had said therefore she never endeavoured to divert herself with reading, or occupation of any kind, and he would spend many an hour trying to entice her attention to some subject which had formerly been her amusement. She was conscious of his aim, and in her better moods endured his efforts placidly, only showing their uselessness by now and then suppressing a wearied sigh, and checking him at last with the saddest of smiles and kisses. At other times she would turn petulantly away, and hide her face in her hands, or even push him off angrily, and then he took care to let her alone, for he was certain of doing no good. Gimmerton chapel bells were still ringing, and the full, mellow flow of the beck in the valley came soothingly on the ear. It was a sweet substitute for the yet absent murmur of the summer foliage, which drowned that music out the grange when the trees were aleaf. At Wuthering Heights it always sounded on quiet days following the great thaw or a season of steady rain. And of Wuthering Heights, Catherine was thinking as she listened. That is, if she thought or listened at all. But she had the vague, distant look I mentioned before, which expressed no recognition of material things either by ear or eye. "There's a letter for you, Miss Linton," I said gently, inserting it in one hand that rested on her knee. "You must read it immediately, because it wants an answer. Shall I break the seal?" "Yes," she answered, without altering the direction of her eyes. I opened it. It was very short. "Now," I continued, "read it." She drew away her hand and let it fall. I replaced it in her lap and stood waiting till it should please her to glance down. But that moment was so long delayed that at last I resumed. "You must read it, ma'am. It is from Mr. Heathcliff." There was a start, and a troubled gleam of recollection, and a struggle to arrange her ideas. She lifted the letter and seemed to pursue it, and when she came to the signature she sighed, yet still, and found she had not gathered its import, for upon my desiring to hear her reply, she merely pointed to the name and gazed at me with mournful, questioning eagerness. "I cannot read, Nelly, I am brooding." "Well, he wishes to see you," said I, guessing her need of an interpreter. "He's in the garden by this time, and impatient to know what answer I shall bring." As I spoke, I observed a large dog lying on the sunny grass beneath its ears, as if about to bark, and then smoothing them back, announced by a wag of the tail that someone approached whom it did not consider a stranger. Mrs. Linton bent forward and listened breathlessly. The minute after, a step traversed the hall. The open house was too tempting for Heathcliff to resist walking in. Most likely he supposed that I was inclined to shirk my promise, and so resolved to trust his own audacity. The audacity! With straining eagerness, Catherine gazed towards the entrance of her chamber. He did not hit the right room directly. She motioned me to admit him, and he found it out ere I could reach the door, and in a stride or two was at her side, and had her grasped in his arms. He neither spoke nor loosened his hold for some 5 minutes, during which period he bestowed more kisses than ever he gave in his life before, I dare say. But then my mistress had kissed him first, and I plainly saw that he could hardly bear, for downright agony, to look into her face. The same conviction had stricken him as me. From the instant he beheld her, that there was no prospect of ultimate recovery there. She was fated, sure to die. "Oh, Cathy! Oh, my life! How can I bear it?" was the first sentence he uttered, in a tone that did not seek to disguise his despair. And now he stared at her so earnestly that I thought the very intensity of his gaze would bring tears into his eyes, but they burned with anguish. They did not melt. "What now?" said Catherine. Leaning back and returning his look with a sudden clouded brow. Her humour was a mere vein for constantly varying caprices. "You and Edgar have broken my heart, Heathcliff, and you both come to bewail the deed to me as if you were the people to be pitied. I shall not pity you. Not I. You have killed me, and thriven on it, I think. How strong you are! How many years do you mean to live after I am gone?" Because obviously it's totally not my fault. Meh. Heathcliff had knelt on one knee to embrace her. He attempted to rise, but she seized his hair and kept him down. "I wish I could hold you," she continued bitterly, "till we were both dead. I shouldn't care what you suffered. I care nothing for your sufferings. Why shouldn't you suffer? I do. Will you forget me? Will you be happy when I am in the earth? Will you say 20 years hence, 'That's the grave of Catherine Earnshaw. I loved her long ago, and was wretched to lose her. But it is past. I've loved many others since. My children are dearer to me than she was, and at death I shall not rejoice that I am going to her. I shall be sorry that I must leave them. Will you say so, Heathcliff?" "Don't torture me till I'm mad as yourself," cried he, wrenching his head free and grinding his teeth. Good old Catherine, blame everyone but herself. Yeah, that's the only way she can process life. The two, to a cool spectator, made a strange and fearful picture. Well might Catherine deem that heaven would be a land of exile to her, unless with her mortal body she cast away her mortal character also. Her present countenance had a wild vindictiveness in its white cheek, and a bloodless lip and scintillating eye, and she retained in her clouded fingers a portion of the locks she had been grasping. As to her companion, while raising himself with one hand, he had taken her arm with the other, and so inadequate was his shock of gentleness to the requirements of her condition, that on his letting go, I saw 4 distinct impressions left blue on the colourless skin. "You are possessed with the devil," he pursued savagely, "to talk in that manner to me when you are dying. Do you reflect that all those words will be branded in my memory, and eating deeper eternally after you have left me? You know you lie to say I have killed you, And Catherine, you know that I could as soon forget you as my existence. It is not is it not sufficient for your internal selfishness that while you are at peace, I shall writhe in the torments of hell? I shall not be at peace, moaned Catherine, recalled to a sense of physical weakness by the violence, unequal throbbing of her heart, which beat visibly and audibly under the excess of agitation. She was nothing further until the paroxysm was over. Then she continued more kindly, I'm not wishing you greater torment than I have, Heathcliff. I only wish us never to be parted. And should a word of mine distress you hereafter, think I feel the same distress underground. And for my own sake, forgive me. Come here and kneel down again. You have never harmed me in your life. Nay, if you nurse anger, that will be worse to remember than my harsh words. Won't you come here again? Do. Heathcliff went to the back of her chair and leant over, but not so far as to let her see his face, which was livid with emotion. She bent down to look at him. He would not permit it. Turning abruptly, he walked to the fireplace, where he stood, silent, with his back towards us. Mrs. Linton's glance followed him suspiciously. Every movement woke a new sentiment in her. After a pause and a prolonged gaze, she resumed, addressing me in accents of indignant disappointment. Oh, you see, Nelly, he would not relent a moment to keep me out of the grave. That is how I'm loved. Well, never mind. That is not my Heathcliff. I shall love mine yet, and take him with me. He's in my soul, and, she musingly, the thing that irks me the most is this shattered person after all. I'm tired of being enclosed here. I'm wearying to escape into that glorious world, and to be always there, not seeing it dimly through tears, and yearning for it through the walls of an aching heart, but really with it, and in it. Nelly, you think you are better and more fortunate than I. In full health and strength, you are sorry for me. Very soon, that will be altered. I shall be sorry for you. I shall be incomparably beyond and above you all. I wonder, he won't be near me. She went on to herself. I thought he wished it. Heathcliff, dear, you should not be sullen now. Do come to me, Heathcliff. In her eagerness, she rose and supported herself on the arm of the chair. At that earnest appeal, he turned to her, looking absolutely desperate. His eyes, wide and wet, at last flashed fiercely on her. His breast heaved convulsively. An instant they held asunder, and then how they met I hardly saw. But Catherine made a spring, and he caught her, and they were locked in an embrace from which I thought my mistress would never be released alive. In fact, to my eyes, she seemed directly insensible. He flung himself into the nearest seat, and on my approaching hurriedly to ascertain if she had fainted, he gnashed at me and foamed like a mad dog, and gathered her to him with greedy jealousy. It did not feel as if I were in the company of a creature of my own species. It appeared that he would not understand, though I spoke to him, so I stood off and held my tongue in great perplexity. Get a room! A movement of Catherine's relieved me a little presently. She put up her hand to clasp his neck and bring her cheek to his as he held her, while he, in return, covering her with frantic caress, said wildly, You teach me now how cruel you've been. cruel and false. Why did you despise me? Why did you betray your own heart, Kathy? I have not one word of comfort. You deserve this. You have killed yourself. Yes, you may kiss me and cry, and wring out my kisses and tears. They'll blight you. They'll damn you. You loved me. What right had you to leave me? What right, answer me, for the poor fancy you felt for Linton? Because misery and degradation and death and nothing that God or Satan could inflict would have parted us. You, of your will, did it. I have not broken your heart. You have broken it. And in breaking it, you have broken mine. So much the worse for me that I am strong. Do you want to live? What kind of living will it be when you, oh God, would you like to live with your soul in the grave? Let me alone! Let me alone! Sobbed Catherine. If I've done wrong, I'm dying for it. It is enough. You left me too. But I won't upbraid you. I forgive you. Forgive me. You said the thing. Oh, is this a quote he uses? In Limbus. It is hard to forgive, and to look at those eyes, and feel those wasted hands. He answered, kiss me again, and don't let me see your eyes. I forgive what you have done to me. I love my murderer, but yours? How can I? They were silent, their faces hid against each other, and washed by each other's tears. At least, I suppose, the weeping was on both sides, as it seemed Heathcliff could weep on a great occasion like this. I grew very uncomfortable. I'm surprised you're still in the room, Nellie! But I appreciate it because now we know what's happened. Meanwhile, for the afternoon wore away fast. The man whom I had sent off returned from his errand, and I could distinguish by the shine of the western sun up the valley a concourse thickening outside Gimmerton Chapel porch. Service is over, I announced. My master will be here in half an hour. Heathcliff groaned a curse and strained Catherine closer. She never moved. Ere long I perceived a group of servants passing up the road towards the kitchen wing. Mr. Linton was not far behind. He opened the gate himself and sauntered slowly up, probably enjoying the lovely afternoon that breathed as soft as summer. Nellie remember everything word for word. Is real on repeat. She is. Where would we be? This book would be like half the size if it wasn't for Nellie's great memory. Now he is here, I exclaimed. For heaven's sake, hurry down. You'll not meet anyone on the front stairs. Do be quick, and stay among the trees till he is fairly in. I must go, Cathy, said Heathcliff, seeking to extradite himself from his companion's arms. But if I live, I'll see you again before you are asleep. I won't stray 5 yards from your window. You must not go, she answered, holding him as firmly as her struggle allowed. You shall not, I tell you. For 1 hour, he pleaded earnestly. Not for 1 minute, she replied. I must. Linton will be up immediately, persisted the alarmed intruder. He would have risen and unfixed her fingers by the act. She clung fast, grasping. There was mad resolution in her face. No! She shrieked. Oh, don't go! It is the last time. Edgar will not hurt us. Heathcliff, I shall die! I shall die! The damn fool! Here he is! Cried Heathcliff, sinking back into his seat. Hush, my darling, hush, hush, Catherine. I'll stay. If he shot me so, I'd expire with a blessing on my lips. And they were fast again. I heard my master mounting the stairs. The cold sweat ran from my forehead. I was horrified. Oh, poor Nellie. She's gonna get caught in the middle of this. Are you going to listen to her ravings? I said passionately. She does not know what she says. Will you ruin her because she has not wits to help herself? Get up! You should be free instantly. That is the most diabolical deed that you ever did. We are all done for, master, mistress, and servant. I wrung my hands and cried out, and Mr. Linton hastened his step at the noise. In the midst of my agitation, I was sincerely glad to observe that Catherine's arms had fallen, relaxed, and her head hung down. She's fainted or dead, I thought. So much the better. Far better than she should be dead, than lingering a burden and a misery maker to all about her. Edgar sprang to his unbidden guest and blanched with astonishment and rage. Boris, you made it just in time. Shit's about to kick off. Heathcliff's in the Linton house again, and Edgar's just come home and found him with Catherine in his arms. Tried buying shoes but couldn't find ones I used in sizes I needed. 'Tis always the way. 'Tis always the way. What he meant to do, I cannot tell. However, the other stopped all demonstrations at once by placing the lifeless-looking form in his arms. Look there, he said. Unless you be a fiend, help her first, then you shall speak to me. He walked into the parlour and sat down. Mr. Linton summoned me, and with great difficulty, and after resorting to many means, we managed to restore her to sensation. But she was all bewildered. She sighed and moaned, and knew nobody. Edgar, in his anxiety for her, forgot her hated friend. Oh, my immediate thought was Heathcliff was in the house, like Ghostface from Scream. Run a collision course with wackiness. Yeah. I did not. I went at the earliest opportunity and besought him to depart, affirming that Catherine was better, and he should hear from me in the morning how she passed the night. I shall not refuse to go out of doors, he answered, but I shall stay in the garden. And Nelly, mind you keep your word tomorrow. I shall be under those larch trees. Mind, or I shall pay another visit, whether Linton be in or not. He sent a rapid glance through the half-open door of the chamber, and, asserting that I stated was true, delivered the house of his lurkless presence. Oh my. So things didn't kick off as much there. Because to be fair, like I said, the Lintons are kind of the most normal ones. He has his priorities straight. He went to help his wife rather than beat up Heathcliff, so... Chapter 16. About 12 o'clock that night. About 12 o'clock that night was born the Catherine you saw at Wuthering Heights, a puny 7 months child, and 2 hours after the mother died, having never recovered sufficient consciousness to miss Heathcliff or know Edgar. The latter's distraction at his bewilderment is the subject too painful to dwell on. Its after effects showed how deep the sorrow sunk. A great addition in the eyes was his being left without an heir. I bemoaned that as I gazed on the feeble orphan, and I mentally abused old Linton for what was only natural partiality, thus securing his estate to his own daughter instead of his son's. An unwelcome infant it was, poor thing. It might have wailed out of life, and nobody cared a morsel during those first hours of existence. We redeemed the neglect afterwards, but its beginning was as friendless as its end is likely to be. Next morning, a bright and cheerful out-of-doors stole softened in through the blinds, of the silent room, and suffused the couch and its occupant with a mellow, tender glow. Edgar Linton had his head laid on the pillow, and his eyes shut. His young and fair features were almost as death-like as those of the form beside him. "Hello, Jabberhop, welcome." And almost as fixed. But his was the hush of exhausted anguish, and hers was of perfect peace. Her brows smoothed, her lids closed, her lips wearing the expression of a smile. No angel in heaven could be more beautiful than she appeared, and I partook of the infant calm in which she lay. My mind was never in a holier frame than while I gazed on that untroubled image of divine rest. I instinctively echoed the words she had uttered a few hours before. Incomparably above and beyond us all. Whether still on earth or now in heaven, her spirit is at home with God. I don't know if it be a peculiarity in me, but I am seldom otherwise than happy while watching in the chamber of death. Should no frenzied or despairing mourner share the duty with me, I see a repose that neither earth nor hell can break, and I feel an assurance of the endless shallowless hereafter, the eternity they have entered, where life is boundless in its duration, and love in its sympathy, and joy in its fullness. I notice that on occasion how much selfishness there is even in a love like Mr. Linton's, when he so regretted Catherine's blessed release. To be sure, one might have doubted, after the wayward and impatient existence she had led, whether she merited a haven of peace at last. One might doubt in seasons of cold reflection, but not then, in the presence of her corpse. It asserted its own tranquillity, which seemed a pledge of equal quiet to its former inhabitant. Do you believe such people are happy in the other world, sir? I'd give a great deal to know. I declined answering Mrs. Dean's question, which struck me as something heterodox. She proceeded, retracing the course of Catherine Linton. I fear we have no right to think she is, but will leave her with her Maker. The master looked asleep, and I ventured soon after sunrise to quit the room and steal out to the pure, refreshing air. The servants thought me gone to shake off the drowsiness of my protracted watch. In reality, my chief motive was seeing Mr. Heathcliff. If he had remained among the larches all night, he would have heard nothing of the stir at the Grange, unless perhaps he might catch the gallop of the messenger going to Gimmerton. If he had come nearer, he would probably be aware, from the lights flittering to and fro, and the opening and shutting of the outer doors, that all was not right within. I wished, yet feared to find him. I felt the terrible news must be told, and I longed to get it over, but how to do it I did not know. He was there, at least a few yards further in the park, leant against an old ash tree, his hat off and his hair soaked with the dew that had gathered on the budded branches and fell pattering round him. He had been standing for a long time in that position, for I saw a pair of owls passing and repassing scarcely 3 feet from him, busying in building their nests, and regarding his proximity no more than a piece of timber. They flew off at my approach, and he raised his eyes and spoke. "She's dead?" he said. "I've not waited for you to learn that. Put your handkerchief away. Don't sniffle before me. Damn you all. She wants none of your tears." "She'll have them, though, bitch." I was weeping as much for him as her. We do sometimes pity creatures that have none of the feelings either for themselves or others. When I first looked into his face, I perceived that he had got intelligence of the catastrophe, and a foolish notion struck me that his heart was quelled and he prayed, because his lips moved against his gaze was bent on the ground. "Yes, she's dead," I answered, checking my sobs and drying my cheeks. "Gone to heaven, I hope, where we may, everyone, join her, if we take due warning and leave our evil to ways to follow good." It is way too late for Heathcliff to go to heaven at this point, I think. "Did she take due warning, then?" asked Heathcliff, attempting a sneer. "Did she die like a saint? Come, give me a true history of the event. How did—" He endeavoured to pronounce the name, but could not manage it, and compressing his mouth, he held a silent combat with his inward agony, defying, meanwhile, my sympathy with an unflinching, ferocious stare. "How did she die?" he resumed at last, fain, notwithstanding his hardihood, to have a support behind him, for after the struggle he trembled in spite of himself to his very finger ends. "Poor wretch," I thought. "You have a heart and nerves the same as your brother men. Why should you be anxious to conceal them? Your pride cannot blind God. You tempted him to wring them, till he forces a cry of humiliations." "Quietly as a lamb," I answered aloud. She drew a sigh and stretched herself like a child reviving and sinking again to sleep, and 5 minutes after I felt one little pulse at her heart and nothing more. Wait, no, I thought that was him being angry. I answered, I thought. See, that the punctuation confused me then, because then this is a new line, so I assumed it was like another person, but it's not. I'm sure Heathcliff will find a way. "And did she ever mention me?" he asked, hesitating as if he dreaded the answer to his question would introduce details that he could not bear to hear. "Her senses never returned. She recognized nobody from the time you left her," I said. "She lies with a sweet smile on her face, and her latest ideas wandered back to pleasant early days. Her life closed in a gentle dream. May she wake as kindly in the other world." "May she wake in torment!" he cried with frightful vehemence, stamping his foot and groaning in a sudden paroxysm of ungovernable passion. "Why, she's a liar to the end! Where is she? Not there, not in heaven, not perished. Where? Oh, you said you cared nothing for my sufferings, and I pray one prayer. I repeat it till my tongue stiffens. Catherine Earnshaw, may you not rest as long as I am living. You said I killed you. Haunt me then. The murdered do haunt their murderers, I believe. I know that ghosts have wandered the earth. Be with me always. Take any form. Drive me mad. Too late. Only do not leave me in this abyss where I cannot find you. Oh God, it is unutterable. I cannot live without my life. I cannot live without my soul." He dashed his head against the knotted trunk and lifted his eyes, howled, not like a man, but like a savage beast being goaded to death with knives and spears. I observed several splashes of blood about the bark of the tree, and his hand and forehead were both stained. Probably the scene I witnessed was a repetition of others acted during the night. It hardly moved my compassion. It appalled me. Still, I felt reluctant to quit him so. But the moment he recollected himself enough to notice me watching, he thundered a command for me to go, and I obeyed. He was beyond my skill to quiet or console. What VTuber fans say when their ocean graduates? Me when I saw Fauna's graduation. he is. Rip Fauna. Mrs. Linton's funeral was appointed to take place on Friday following her decease, and till then her coffin remained uncovered and strewn with flowers and scented leaves. In the great drawing room, Linton spent his days and nights there a sleepless guardian, and a circumstance concealed from all but me, Heathcliff spent his nights, at least outside, equally a stranger to repose. I held no communication with him, still I was conscious of his design to enter if he could. And on the Tuesday, a little after dark, when my master, from sheer fatigue, had been compelled to retire a couple of hours, I went and opened one of the windows, moved by his perseverance to give him a chance of bestowing on the faded image of his idol one final adieu. He did not omit to avail himself of the opportunity, cautiously and briefly too, cautiously to betray his presence by the slightest noise. Indeed, I shouldn't have discovered that he had been there, except for the disarrangement of the drapery about the corpse's face, and for observation on the floor a curl of light hair fastened with a silver thread, which, on examination, I ascertained to have been taken from a locket around Catherine's neck. Heathcliff had opened the trinket and cast out its contents, replacing them by a black lock of his own. I twisted the two and enclosed them together. Oh, Nelly! As much as Heathcliff always had her heart, she always had Edgar's, so I think it's nice that both of them are in there. Mr. Earnshaw was, of course, invited to attend the remains of his sister to the grave. He sent no excuse, but he never came, so that, besides her husband, the mourners were wholly comprised of tenants and servants. Isabel was not asked. Poor Isabel. The place of Catherine's interment, to the surprise of the villagers, was neither in the chapel under the carved monument of the Lintons, nor yet by the tombs of her own relations outside. It was dug on a green slope in a corner of the kirkyard, where the wall was so low that heath and bilberry plants have consumed over it from the moor, and peat mould almost bruises it. Her husband lies in the same spot now, and they have each a simple headstone above, and a plain grey block at their feet to mark the graves. What now? She's dead. Are we going back to the present now, or are we still having even more backstory? Because, like, unless Nellie went back to Wuthering Heights, which we know she didn't, she stayed at the Grange because that's why she's tending to Lockhart. Now it gets even funnier. Oh my god. Now the real shit that wasn't the real shit show. I don't know if I'm ready for the real shit show after that. That Friday made the last of our fine days for a month. It was in the evening the weather broke. The wind shifted from south to northeast and brought rain first and then sleet and snow. On the morrow, one could hardly imagine that there had been 3 weeks of summer. The primroses, the crocuses were hidden under wintry drifts. The larks were silent, the young leaves of the early trees smitten and blackened, and dreary, and chill, and dismal. That morrow did creep over. My master kept his room. I took possession of the lonely parlour, converting it into a nursery, and there I was, sitting with the mourning doll of a child laid on my knee, rocking it to and fro, and watching meanwhile. The still driving flakes built up the uncurtained window when the door opened, and some person entered, out of breath and laughing. My anger was greater than my astonishment for a minute. I suppose it one of the maids, and I cried, "Have done! How dare you show your giddiness here? What would Mr. Linton say if he had heard you?" "Excuse me," answered a familiar voice, "but I know Edgar is in bed, and I cannot stop myself." With that, the speaker came forward to the fire, panting and holding her hand to her side. "I have run the whole way from Wuthering Heights," she continued after a pause, "except where I've flown. I couldn't count the number of falls I've had. Oh, I'm aching all over. Don't be alarmed. There shall be an explanation as soon as I can give it. Only just have the goodness to step out and order the carriage to take me on to Gimmerton, and tell the servant to sneak up a few clothes in my wardrobe." The intruder was Mrs. Heathcliff. "Isabel!" She certainly seemed in no laughing predicament. Her hair streamed on her shoulders, dripping with snow and water. She was dressed in the girlish dress she commonly wore, befitting her age more than her position. A low frock with short sleeves, and nothing on either head or neck. The frock was of light silk and clung to her with wet, and her feet were protected merely by thin slippers. Add to this a deep cut under one ear, which only the cold prevented from bleeding profusely, a white face scratched and bruised, and a frame hardly able to support itself through fatigue, and you may fancy my first fright was not much allayed when I had leisure to examine her. "My dear young lady," I exclaimed, "I'll stir nowhere, and hear nothing, till you have removed every article of your clothes, and put on dry things, and certainly you shall not go to Gimmerton tonight, so it is needless to order the carriage." "Certainly I shall," she said, "walking or riding, yet I've no objection to dress myself decently, and, see how it flows down my neck now. The fire does make it smart." She insisted on fulfilling her directions, before she would let me touch her, and not till after the coachman had been instructed to get ready, and a maid set to pack up some necessary attire. I did obtain her consent for binding the wound, and helping to change her garments. "Now, Ellen," she said, when my task was finished, and she was seated in an easy-chair on the hearth, with a cup of tea before her, "you sit down opposite me, and put poor Catherine's baby away. I don't like to see it. You mustn't think I care little for Catherine, because I behaved so foolishly on entering. I've cried too, bitterly, yes, more than anyone else has reason to cry. We parted unreconciled, you remember, and I shan't forgive myself. But for all that, I was not going to sympathize with him, the brute beast. Oh, give me the poker. This is the last thing of his I have about me." She slipped the gold ring from her third finger and threw it on the floor. "I'll smash it," she continued, striking it with childish spite, "and then I'll burn it." She took it and dropped the misused article among the coals. "There! He shall buy another, and if he gets me back again, he'd be capable of coming to seek me, to tease Edgar. I dare not say, lest that notion should possess his wicked head. And besides, Edgar has not been kind, has he? And I won't come suing for his assistance, nor will I bring him into more trouble. Necessity compelled me to seek shelter here, though if I had not learned he was out of the way, I'd have halted at the kitchen, washed my face, warmed myself, got you to bring what I wanted, and departed again to anywhere out of the reach of my accursed of that incarnate goblin. He was such a fury. If he had caught me, it's a pity Earnshaw is not his match in strength. I wouldn't have run till I'd seen him, all but demolished, had Hindley been able to do it. Well, don't talk so fast, miss, I interrupted. You'll disorder the handkerchief I have tied around your face, and make the cut bleed again. Drink your tea, and take breath, and give over laughing. Laughter is sadly out of place under this roof, in your condition. An undeniable truth, she replied. Listen to that child. It maintains a constant wail. Send it out of my hearing for an hour. I shan't stay any longer. I rang the bell and committed to the servant's care, and then inquired what had urged her to escape from Wuthering Heights in such an unlikely plight, and where she meant to go, as she refused remaining with us. I ought, and I wish to remain, answered she, to cheer Edgar and take care of the baby, for 2 things, and because the Grange is my right home. But I tell you, he wouldn't let me. Do you think he could bear to see me grow fat and merry? Could bear to think that we were tranquil and not resolve on poisoning our comfort? Now I have the satisfaction of being sure that he detests me, to the point of its annoying him seriously to have me within earshot or eyesight. I notice when I enter his presence, the muscles of his countenance are involuntarily distorted into an expression of hatred, partly arising from his knowledge of the good causes I have feel that sentiment for him, and partly from original aversion for drinking bottles. That would be the sound of my mic arm, but sure. Yeah. It is strong enough to make me feel certain that he would chase me over England, supposing I contrived a clear escape, and therefore I must get quite away. I've recovered from my first desire to be killed by him. I'd rather he'd killed himself. He has extinguished my love effectually, and so I'm at my ease. I can recollect how I loved him, and can dimly imagine that I should still be loving him, no, even if he had doted on me, the devilish nature would have revealed its existence somehow. Catherine had an awful perverted taste to esteem him so dearly. Knowing him so well, monster, would that he could be blotted out of creation and out of my memory. It sounded like a rubber lid echoing up the inside. Must have watched Free Red recently. Hush, hush, he's a human being, I said. Be more charitable. There are worse men than he is yet. I really am not sure there are sometimes. Oh, hello, Tella! That was 16 minutes ago that you rated with 2 people, but I've been way too into this book to notice. 10 out of 10, best streamer. He is not a human being, she retorted, and he has no claim on my charity. I gave him my heart, and he took and pinched it to death and flung it back at me. People feel with their hearts, Ellen, and since he has destroyed mine, I have not the power to feel for him. And I would not, though he groaned from this to his dying day, and wept his tears of blood for Catherine. No, indeed, I wouldn't. There are worse men than he, citation needed. And here Isabel began to cry, but immediately dashing the water from her lashes, she recompensed. You asked what has driven me to flight at last. I was compelled to attempt it because I had succeeded in rousing his rage a pitch above his malignity. Pulling out the nerves with red-hot pincers requires more coolness than knocking on the head. He has worked up to forget the fiendish prudence he boasted of, and proceeded to murderous violence. I experienced pleasure in being able to exasperate him. The sense of pleasure woke my instinct of self-preservation, so I fairly broke free, and if I ever come into his hands again, he is welcome to signal his revenge. I mean, sure, there are probably worse men than him, but it's like saying there's worse than being eaten by an alligator. It really is. That's a very good analogy. Yesterday, you know, Mr. Earnshaw should have been at the funeral. He kept himself sober for the purpose, tolerably sober, not going to bed mad at 6 o'clock, and getting up drunk at 12. Consequently, he rose, in suicidal low spirits, as fit for the church as for a dance, and instead he sat down by the fire and swallowed gin, or brandy by the tumblerfuls. Heathcliff, I shudder to name him, has been a stranger in the house from last Sunday till today. Whether the angels have fed him, or his kin beneath, I cannot tell, but he has not eaten a meal with us for nearly a week. He has just come home at dawn, and gone upstairs to his chamber, locking himself in, as if anybody dreamt of converting his company. There he has continued praying like a Methodist, only the deity he implored is senseless dust and ashes, and God, when addressed, was curiously confounded with his own black father. After concluding these precious orisons, and they lasted generally till he grew hoarse and his voice was strangled in his throat, he would be off again, always straight down to the Grange. I wonder Edgar did not send for a constable and give him into custody. For me, grieved as I was about Catherine, it was impossible to avoid regarding this season of deliverance from degrading oppression as a holiday. I recovered spirits sufficient to hear Joseph's eternal lectures without weeping, and to move up and down the house less with the foot of a frightened thief than formerly. You wouldn't think that I should cry at anything Joseph could say, but he and Hareton are detestable companions. I'd rather sit with Hindley, and hear his awful talk, that with to little Masties, and his staunch supporter. That odious man. When Heathcliff is in, I'm often obliged to seek the kitchen, and their society, or starve amongst the damp, uninhabited chambers, when he is not, as was the case this week. I established a table and chair at one corner of the house fire, and never mind how Mr. Earnshaw may occupy himself, and he does not interfere with my arrangements. He is quieter now than he used to be, if no one provokes him, more sullen and depressed, and less furious. Joseph affirms that he's sure he's an altered man, that the Lord has touched his heart, and he is saved, so as by fire. I'm puzzled to detect signs of favourable changes, but it is not my business. Yester evening, I sat in my nook reading some old books till late on towards 12. It seemed so dismal to go upstairs, with the wild snow blowing outside, and my thoughts continually reverting to the kirkyard and the new-made grave. I dared hardly lift my eyes from the page before me. That melancholy scene so indistantly usurped its place. Hindley sat opposite, his head leant on his hand, perhaps meditating on the same subject. He had ceased drinking at a point below irrationality, and had neither stirred nor spoken during 2 or 3 hours. There was no sound through the house, but the moaning wind, which took the windows every now and then, the faint crackling of the coals, and the click of my snuffers as I removed at intervals the long wick of the candle. Hareton and Joseph were probably fast asleep in bed. It was very, very sad. and while I read I sighed, for it seemed as if all joy had vanished from the world, never to be restored. The doleful silence was broken at length by the sound of the kitchen latch. Heathcliff had returned from his watch earlier than usual, owing, I suppose, to the sudden storm. That entrance was fastened, and we heard him coming round to get in by the other. I rose with an irrepressible expression of what I felt on my lips, which induced my companion, who had been staring towards the door, to turn and look at me. "I'll keep him out for 5 minutes. You won't object." "No, you may keep him out the whole night for me," I answered. "Do put the key in the lock and draw the bolts." She's like, why don't we just lock him out? That sounds great. Earnshaw accomplished this ere his guest reached the front. He came and brought his chair to the other side of my table, leaning over it, and searching in my eyes for a sympathy with the burning hate that gleamed from his. As he both looked and felt like an assassin, he couldn't exactly find that, but he discovered enough to encourage him to speak. "You and I," he said, "have each a great debt to settle with the man out yonder. If we were neither of us cowards, we might combine to discharge it. Are you as soft as your brother? Are you willing to endure the last, and not once attempt a repayment?" "I'm weary of enduring now," I replied, "and I'd be glad of a retaliation that wouldn't recoil on myself. But treachery and violence are spears pointed at both ends. They wound those who resort to them worse than their enemies." One minute. Rob Lemonez. "Treachery and violence are just return for treachery and violence," cried Hindley. "Mrs. Heathcliff, I'll ask you to do nothing, but sit still and be dumb. Tell me now, can you? I'm sure you would have as much pleasures as I witnessing the conclusion of the fiend's existence. He'll be your death unless you overreach him, and he'll be my ruin. Damn the hellish villain. He knocks at the door as if he were master here already. Promise to hold your tongue, and before that clock strikes, it wants 3 minutes of 1. You're a free woman." He took the implements which I described to you in my letter from his breast, and would have turned down the candle. I snatched it away, however, and seized his arm. I'll not hold my tongue," I said. "You mustn't touch him. Let the door remain shut and be quiet." "No, I formed my resolution, and by God I'll execute it," cried the desperate being. "I'll do you a kindness in spite of yourself, and Hareton justice. And you needn't trouble your head to screen me. Catherine is gone. Nobody alive would regret me or be ashamed, though I cut my throat this minute, and it's time to make an end." I might as well have struggled with a bear or reasoned with a lunatic. The only recourse left me was to run a lattice and warn his intended victim of the fate which awaited him. Should you, though? Is that your only recourse? I mean, I think your only recourse is to sit back and let the pieces fall where they may. "You'd better seek shelter somewhere else tonight," I exclaimed in rather a triumphant tone. "Mr. Earnshaw has a mind to shoot you, if you persist in endeavouring to enter." "You'd better open the door, you," he answered, addressing me by some elegant term that I don't care to repeat. "I shall not meddle in the matter," I retorted again. "Come in and get shot, if you please. I've done my duty." With that, I shut the window and returned to my place by the fire. To be fair, she did some shit by doing that. She's already put herself... He's already on her shit list. I see why he is now on the murder list. Having too small a stock of hypocrisy at my command to pretend any anxiety for the danger that menaced him, Earnshaw swore passionately at me, affirming that I loved the villain yet, and calling me all sorts of names for the base spirit I evinced. And I, in my secret heart, and conscious never approached me, thought what a blessing it would be for him should Heathcliff be put out of misery, and what a blessing for me should he send Heathcliff to his right abode. As I sat nursing these reflections, the casement behind me was banged on to the floor by a blow from the latter individual, and his back countenance looked blightingly through. The stanchions stood too close to suffer his shoulders to follow, and I smiled, exulting in my fancied security. His hair and clothes were whitened with snow, and his sharp cannibal teeth, revealed by cold and wrath, gleamed through the dark. "Isabella, let me in, or I'll make you repent," he grinned, as Joseph calls it. "I cannot commit murder," I replied. "Mr. Henley stands sentinel with a knife and loaded pistol." "Let me in the kitchen door," he said. "Henley will be there before me," I answered. "And that's a poor love of yours that cannot bear a shower of snow. We were left at peace in our beds as long as the summer moon shone. But the moment a blast of winter returns, you must run for shelter. Heathcliff, if I were you, I'd go stretch myself over her grave and die like a faithful dog." God damn, woman! This is why she had to run away! The world is surely not worth living now, is it? You had distinctly impressed on me the idea that Catherine was the whole joy of your life. I can't imagine how you think of surviving her loss. "He's there, is he?" exclaimed my companion, rushing to the gap. "If I can get my arm out, I can hit him." "I'm afraid, Ellen, that you'll set me down as really wicked." No, Isabella, I'm setting you down as actually kinda badass. I love this girl. "But you don't know all, so don't judge. I wouldn't have aided or abetted an attempt on even his life for anything. Wish that he were dead, I must, and therefore I was fearfully disappointed and unnerved by the terror of the consequences of my taunting speech, when he flung himself on Earnshaw's weapon and wrenched it from his grasp. The charge exploded, and the knife, in springing back, closed onto its owner's wrist. Heathcliff pulled it away by main force, slitting up the flesh as it passed on, and thrust it dripping into his pocket. He then took a stone, struck down the division between the two windows, and sprang in. His adversary had fallen senseless with excessive pain, and the flow of blood that gushed from an artery or a large vein. The ruffian kicked and trampled on him, and dashed his head repeatedly against the flags, holding me with one hand meantime to prevent me from summoning Joseph. He exerted preterhuman self-denial in abstaining from finishing him completely. They should take care of replay and be done with it. Yep, they waited too long. They decided to talk too much. They monologued. But getting out of breath, he finally desisted and dragged the apparently inanimate body on to the settle. There he tore off the sleeve of Earnshaw's coat and bound up the wound with a brutal roughness, spitting and cursing during the operation as energetically as he had kicked before. Being at liberty, I lost no time in seeking the old servant who, having gathered by degrees the purport of my hasty tale, hurried below, gasping as he descended the 2 steps at once. Oh no, now Joseph's involved. What's there to do now? What's there to do now? There's this to do, thundered Heathcliff, that your master's mad, and should he last another month, I'll have him to an asylum. And now the devil did you come, and how the devil did you come to fasten me out, you toothless hound? Don't stand muttering and mumbling there. Come, I'm not going to nurse him. Wash that stuff away and mind the sparks of the candle. It is more than half brandy. And so ye been mothering on him? Exclaimed Joseph, lifting his hands and eyes in horror. If I ever see sight like it, may the Lord... Heathcliff gave him a push to his knees in the middle of the blood and flung a towel at him, but instead of proceeding to dry it up, he joined his hands and began a prayer, which excited my laugh from its odd phraseology. I was in the condition of mind to be shocked at nothing. In fact, I was as reckless as some malefactors show themselves at the foot of the gallows. Oh, I forget you, said the tyrant. You shall do that. Down with you. And you conspire with him against me, do you, viper? There, that is work fit for you. He shook me till my teeth rattled and pitched me beside Joseph, who steadily concluded his supplications and then rose, vowing he would set off for the Grange directly. Mr. Linton was a magistrate, and though he had 50 wives dead, he should inquire into this. He was so obstinate in his resolution that Heathcliff deemed it expedient to compel him from my lips a recapitulation of what had taken place, standing over me, heaving with malevolence, as I reluctantly delivered the account in answer to his questions. It required a great deal of labour to satisfy the old man that Heathcliff was not the aggressor, especially with my hardly wrung replies. Yeah, I don't know where Mr. Linton... Unless they mean, like, Daddy Linton, not like the Linton we've been talking about. Not Edgar. Edgar's dad, maybe. Did Edgar's dad have 50 wives dead? I don't know. Your phone died right as the fight started, bro. However, Mr. Earnshaw soon convinced him that he was still alive. Joseph hastened to administer a dose of spirits, and by their succour his master presently regained motion and consciousness. Heathcliff, aware his opponent was ignorant of the treatment received while insensible, called him deliriously intoxicated, and said he should not notice his atrocious conduct further, but advise him to get to bed. To my joy, he left us, after giving his judications counsel, and Hindley stretched himself on the hearthstone. I departed to my own room, marvelling that I had escaped so easily. You would also think that no one would agree to marry after, like, wife 6. Maybe. But if he has a lot of money, some people don't have sense. This morning, when I came down, about half an hour before noon, Mr. Earnshaw was sitting by the fire, deadly sick. His evil genius, almost as gaunt and ghastly, leant against the chimney. Neither appeared to declined to dine, and having waited till all was cold, oh, that one came out of nowhere. Holy shit. Neither appeared inclined to dine, and having waited till all was cold on the table, I commenced alone. Nothing hindered me from eating heartily, and I experienced a certain sense of satisfaction and superiority as, at intervals, I cast a look towards my silent companions, and felt the comfort of a quiet conscience within me. After I had done, I ventured on the usual liberty of drawing near the fire, going round Earnshaw's seat and kneeling in the corner beside him. Got an ad for Wix when the fight started, and I will now make it my life's mission to buy the website and turn it into a cheap Pornhub glow. Probably make a fair amount of money from that. I could be misunderstanding what happened, but whoa, both Heathcliff and Mrs. Heathcliff are really are typhoon rippling through the area. I could keep a few zip codes in between them myself. You really should. But basically what happened is they locked the door. Basically just beat the shit out of Hindley. Pretty much. And he kept Mrs. Heathcliff there for a while so that she didn't run and get Joseph straight away. Eventually she did manage to run and get Joseph, but that was after Heathcliff was a bloodied mess on the floor. Not Heathcliff, Hindley was a bloodied mess on the floor. Heathcliff did not glance my way, and I gazed up, and contemplated his features almost as confidently as if they had been turned to stone. His forehead, that I once thought so manly, and that I now think so diabolical, was shaded with a heavy cloud. His basilisk eyes, oh my god, that's one way to describe someone that you don't like. They're fucking snake eyes, bitch. Not just snake eyes, basilisk eyes. Badass. Were nearly quenched by sleepiness, and weeping, perhaps, for the lasses were wet then, his lips devoid of their ferocious sneer, and sealed in an expression of unspeakable sadness. Had it been another, I would have covered my face in the presence of such grief. In his case, I was gratified and ignoble, as it seems to insult a fallen enemy. I couldn't miss this chance of sticking in a dart. Oh look, he's grieving! Now's the time to fuck with him. Oh, is he? His weakness was the only time when I could taste the delight of paying wrong for wrong. Fee, miss, I interrupted. One might suppose you had never opened a Bible in your life. If God afflicted your enemies, surely that ought to suffice you. It is both mean and presumptuous to add your torture to his. Being around Heathcliff for a few months starts to rub off on you. She's learned some terrible things from him. In general, allow that it would be, Ellen, she continued. But what misery laid on Heathcliff could content me, unless I have a hand in it. I'd rather he suffered less, if I might be the cause of his suffering, and he might know that I was the cause. Oh, I owe him so much. On only one condition can I hope to forgive him. It is, if I may take an eye for an eye, a tooth for a tooth. For every wretch of agony return a wretch. Reduce him to my level, as he was the first to injure. Make him the first to implore pardon. And then, why then, Ellen, might I show you some generosity. But it is utterly impossible. I can never be revenged, and therefore I cannot forgive him. Hindley wanted some water, and I handed him a glass, and asked him how he was. Not as ill as I wish, he replied, but leaving out my arm, every inch of me is as sore as I had been fighting with a large legion of imps. Yes, no wonder, was my next remark. Catherine used to boast that she stood between you and bodily harm. She meant that certain persons would not hurt you for fear of offending her. It's well people don't really rise from their graves, or last night she might have witnessed a repulsive scene. But not you bruised and cut over your chest and shoulders? I can't say, he answered. But what do you mean? Did he dare to strike me when I was down? He trampled on and kicked you, and dashed you on the ground, I whispered, and his mouth watered to tear you with his teeth, because he's only half man, not so much, and the rest fiend. God damn, Izzy. God damn. Mr. Earnshaw looked up, like me, to the countenance of our mutual foe, who, absorbed in his anguish, seemed insensible to anything around him. The longer he stood, the plainer his reflections revealed their blackness through his features. Oh, if God would but give me strength to strangle him in my last agony, I'd go to hell with joy, groaned the impatient man, writhing to rise and sinking back in despair, convinced of his inadequacy for the struggle. Nay, it's not that he has murdered one of you, I observed aloud. At the Grange, everyone knows your sister would have been living now, had it not been for Mr. Heathcliff. After all, it is preferable to be hated than loved by him. When I recollect how happy Catherine was before he came, I'm fit to curse the day. Most likely Heathcliff noticed more the truth of what was said than the spirit of the person who said it. His attention was roused. I saw, for his eyes rained down tears among the ashes, and he drew his breath in suffocating sighs. I stared full at him, and laughed scornfully. The clouded windows of hell flashed a moment towards me. The fiend which usually looked out, however, was so dimmed and drowned that I did not fear to hazard another sound of derision. Get up and be gone from my sight, said the mourner. I guess he uttered those words at least, though his voice was hardly intelligible. I beg your pardon, I replied, but I loved Catherine too, and her brother requires attendance, which, for her sake, I shall supply, now that she's dead. I see her in Hindley. Hindley has exactly her eyes. If you had not tried to gouge them out, and made them black and red, and her get up, wretched idiot, before I stamp you to death, he cried, making a movement that caused me to make one also. But then, oh, Izzy, can you not? Can we stop here? But then, I continued, holding myself ready to flee, if poor Catherine had trusted you, and assumed the ridiculous, contemptible, degrading title of Mrs. Heathcliff, she would soon have presented a similar picture. She wouldn't have borne your abominable behaviour quickly. Her detestation and disgust must have found voice. The back of the settle and Earnshaw's person interposed between me and him. So instead of endeavouring to reach me, he snatched a dinner knife from the table and flung it at my head. It struck beneath my ear and stopped the sentence I was uttering. But pulling it out, I sprang to the door and delivered another, which I hoped went a little deeper than his missile. The last glimpse I caught of him was a furious rush on his part, checked by the embrace of his host, and both fell locked together on the hearth. In my flight through the kitchen, I bid Joseph speed to his master. I knocked over Hareton, who was hanging a litter of puppies from a chair in the doorway, and blessed as a soul escaped from purgatory, I bounded, leaped, and flew down the steep road. Then, quitting its windings, shot direct across the moor, rolling over banks and wading through marshes, precipitating myself, in fact, towards the beacon of light of the Grange, and as far as I could be condemned to a perpetual dwelling in the infernal regions that, even for one night, abide beneath the roof of Wuthering Heights. She's a visionary. She was going for the MAD doctrine before it became a thing. She was gonna take him down a notch, but then he was like, no, I'm gonna fucking kill her! Scary. Isabella ceased speaking and took a drink of tea. Then she rose, bidding me put on her bonnet and a great shawl, and a great shawl I had brought, and turning a deaf ear to my entreaties for her to remain another hour. She stopped on a chair, kissed Edgar and Catherine's portraits, bestowed a similar salute on me, and descended to the carriage, accompanied by Fanny, who yelped with wild joy at recovering her mistress. She said, what's the thing that she said? Sorry. Blah. Sorry, I had something in my throat. She was driven away, never to revisit this neighbourhood, but a regular correspondence was established between her and my master when things were more settled. I believe her new abode was in the south near London. There she had a son born a few months subsequent to her escape. He was christened Linton, and from the first she reported him to be an ailing, peevish creature. Oh no. Only a few months? So she was already preggers? Lordy. Mr. Heathcliff, meeting me one day in the village, inquired where she lived. I refused to tell. He remarked that he was not of any moment. Only she must beware of coming to her brother. She should not be with him, if he had to keep her himself. Though I would give no information, he discovered, through some other servants, both her place of residence and the existence of the child. Still, he didn't molest her, for which forbearance she might thank his aversion, I suppose. He often asked about the infant when he saw me, and upon hearing his name, smiled grimly and observed, "They wished me to hate it too, do they?" "I don't think they wish you to know anything about it," I answered. "But I'll have it," he said, "when I want it. They may reckon on that." Fortunately, its mother died before the time arrived, some 13 years after the decease of Catherine, when Linton was 12, or little more. On the day of succeeding Isabella's unexpected visit, I had no opportunity of speaking with my master. He shunned conversation and was fit for discussing nothing. When I could get him to listen, I saw it pleased him that his sister had left her husband, whom he abhorred with an intensity which the mildness of his nature would scarcely seem to allow. So deep and sensitive was his aversion that he refrained from going anywhere he would likely see or hear of Heathcliff. Grief and that together transformed him into a complete hermit. He threw up his office of magistrate, ceased even to attend church, avoided the village on all occasions, and spent a life of entire seclusion within the limits of his park and grounds, only varied by solitary rambles on the moors, and visits to the grave of his wife, mostly at evening or early mornings before the wanderers were abroad. But he was too good to be thoroughly unhappy long. He didn't pray for Catherine's soul to haunt him. Time brought resignation and a melancholy sweeter than common joy. He recalled her memory with ardent, tender love, and hopeful aspiring to the better world, where he doubted she was gone. Where he doubted not she was gone. And he had earthly consolation and affections also. For a few days, I said, he seemed regardless of the puny successor to the departed, that coldness melted as fast as snow in April, and ere the tiny thing could stammer a word or totter a step, it wielded a despot's sceptre in his heart. It was named Catherine, but he never called it the name in full, as he never called the first Catherine short, probably because Heathcliff had a habit of doing so. The little one was always Cathy. It formed to him a distinction from the mother, and yet a connection with her, and his attachment sprang from its relation to her, far more than from its being his own. I used to draw a comparison between him and Hindley Earnshaw, and perplex myself to explain satisfactorily why their conduct was so opposite in similar circumstances. They had both been fond husbands, and were both attached to their children, and I could not see how they shouldn't both have taken the same road, for good or evil. But I thought in my mind, Hindley, with apparently the stronger head, has shown himself sadly the worse and the weaker man. When his ship sunk, the captain abandoned his post, and the crew, instead of trying to save her, rushed into riot and confusion, leaving no hope for their luckless vessel. Linton, on the contrary, displayed the true courage of a loyal and faithful soul. He trusted God, and God comforted him. One hoped, and the other despaired. They chose their own lots, and were righteously doomed to endure them. But you'll not want to hear my moralizing, Mr. Lockwood. I'll judge, as well as I can, all these things at least. You'll think you will, and that's the same. The end of Earnshaw was what might have been expected. It followed fast on his sister's. There were scarcely 6 months between them. We at the Grange never got a very succinct account of his state preceding it. All that I did learn was on occasion of going to aid in the preparations for the funeral. Mr. Kenneth came to announce the event to my master. "Well, Nelly," said he, riding into the yard one morning, too early not to alarm me with an instant presentiment of bad news, "it's yours and my turn to go into mourning at present. Who's given us the slip now? Who do you think?" "Who?" I asked in a flurry. "Why, guess! Oh, that's the fucking worst thing to do. Hi, friend! One of us, someone we know, has died. Why don't you guess who it is?" Terrible, terrible, terrible. He returned, dismounting and slinging his bridle upon a hook by the door. "And nip up the corner of your apron. I'm certain you'll need it." "Not Mr. Heathcliff, surely?" I exclaimed. "What? Would you have tears for him?" said the doctor. "No, Heathcliff's a tough fellow. He looks blooming today. I've just seen him. He's rapidly regaining flesh since he lost his better half." "Who is it, then? Mr. Kenneth?" I repeated impatiently. "Hindley Earnshaw, your old friend Hindley," he replied, "and my wicked gossip, though he's been too wild for me this long while. There, I said we should draw water. But cheer up. He died true to his character, drunk as a lord, poor lad. I'm sorry, too. One can't help missing an old companion, though he had the worst tricks with him that ever man imagined, and has done me many a rascally turn. He's barely 27. He was only 27? Jesus Christ. Damn. It seems that's your own age. Who would have thought you were born in 1 year? I confess this blow was greater to me than the shock of Mr. Linton's death. Yeah, but back then that was like 1864. Even so! 27. He wasn't even 30, bro. God damn. Ancient associations lingered round my heart. I sat down in the porch and wept as for blood relation, desiring Mr. Kenneth to get another servant to introduce him to the master. I could not hinder myself from pondering the question. Had he had fair play? Whatever I did, that idea would bother me. It was so tirelessly. This story is about the cycle of abuse and revenge. I'm definitely getting that vibe. Generational trauma. Ew. Whatever I did, that idea would bother me. It was so tiresome, pretentious that I resolved on requesting leave to go to Wuthering Heights and assist in the last duties to the dead. Mr. Linton was extremely reluctant to consent, but I pleaded eloquently for the friendless condition in which he lay, and I said my old master and foster brother had a claim on my services as strong as his own. Besides, I reminded him that the child Hareton was his wife's nephew, and in the absence of nearer kin, he ought to act as its guardian, and he ought to, and must inquire how the property was left, and look over the concerns of his brother-in-law. He was unfit for attending to such matters then, but he bid me speak to his lawyer, and at length permitted me to go. His lawyer had been Earnshaw's also. I called at the village and asked him to accompany me. He shook his head and advised that Heathcliff should be let alone, affirming, if the truth were known, Hareton would be found little else than a beggar. His father died in debt, said he. The whole property is mortgaged, and the sole chance for the natural heir is to allow him an opportunity of creating some interest in the creditor's heart, that he may be inclined to deal with lenity towards him. When I reached the Heights, I explained that I had come to see everything carried on decently, and Joseph, who appeared in sufficient distress, expressed satisfaction at my presence. Mr. Heathcliff said he did not perceive that I was wanted, but I might stay and order the arrangements for the funeral if I choose. Correctly, he remarked, that fool's body should be buried at the crossroads without ceremony of any kind. I happened to leave him 10 minutes yesterday afternoon, and in that interval he fastened the 2 doors of the house against me, and he has spent the night drinking himself to death deliberately. We broke in this morning, for we heard him snorting like a horse, and there he was, laid over the settle, flaying and scalping. Would not have wakened him. I sent for Kenneth, and he came, but not till the beast had changed into a carrion. He was both dead and cold and stark, and so you'll allow it was useless making more stir about him. The old servant confirmed this statement, but muttered, "I'd rather he gone isling for the doctor. I should had ta'en before T Meister, but better not for him. And he warn't dead when I left not for sort. I insisted on the funeral being respectable. Mr. Heathcliff said I might have my own way there too, only he desired me to remember that the money for the whole affair came out of his pocket. He maintained a hard, careless deportment indicative of neither joy nor sorrow. If anything, it expressed a flinty gratification at a piece of difficult work successfully executed. I observed once, indeed, something like exultation in his aspect. It was judged when the house were bearing the coffin from the house. The people. I don't know why I read house when it said people. Oh well. He had the hypocrisy to represent a mourner, and previous to following with Hareton. He lifted the uncomfortable child onto the table and muttered with particular gusto, "Now, my bonny lad, you are mine, and we'll see if one tree won't grow as crooked as another, with the same wind to twist it." The unsuspecting thing was pleased at this speech. He played with Heathcliff's whiskers and stroked his cheek, but I divined its meaning and observed tartly, "That boy must go back with me to Thrushcross Grange, sir. There is nothing in the world less yours than he is." "Does Linton say so?" he demanded. "Of course. He has ordered me to take him," I replied. "Well," said the scoundrel, "we'll not argue the subject now, but I have a fancy to try my hand at rearing a young one, so intimate to your master that I must supply the place of this with my own. If he attempts to remove it, I don't engage to let Hareton go undisputed, but I'll be pretty sure to make the other come. Remember to tell him." This hint was enough to bind our hands. I repeated its substance on my return, and Edgar Linton, little interested in the commencement, spoke no more of interfering. I'm not aware that he could have done it to any purpose, had he been ever so willing. The guest was now the master of Wuthering Heights. He held firm possession, and proved to the attorney, who, in his turn, proved it to Mr. Linton, that Earnshaw had mortgaged every yard of land he owned for cash to supply his mania for gaming, and he, Heathcliff, was the mortgagee. In the manner, Hareton, who should now be the first gentleman in the neighbourhood, was reduced to a state of complete dependency on his father's intimate enemy, and lives in his own house as a servant, deprived of the advantage of wages, quite unable to right himself because of his friendliness and his ignorance that he had been wronged. Bless. A dark-coloured character who was adopted into a family and forms a close bond with his sister figure, and then swears terrible revenge after she dies? Where have I heard that before? My brain isn't working. Where have we heard that before? Oh, and that's the last bit. Cool! Well, I guess we'll stop there for now because we are nearly at the 2-minute mark. 55. So we're over halfway now, and a lot of people are dead. So the next generation's just waking up now. Obviously, he now has Hareton. I guess we have Isabella's inevitable death. So that Hareton... No, Heathcliff will get his son, and then eventually his son will get a waifu, and then we'll be eventually up to where we are. But who knows what's going to happen next? It feels like a lot of the bigger things have kind of resolved themselves. In other words, they've died now, so... How can Catherine have more plot if she is dead? I mean, she's the reason all of this started, to be fair. Because he found the books Catherine had. And then that's what prompted the questioning, and that's what prompted the rest of the story. So, I mean, this is all Catherine's fault. All Catherine's fault. Probably not, though. For now, though. If only death could end the cycle. The cycle continues. The cycle will never end. Though, it will end for now. For today. Until next Sunday. Thank you so much, everyone, for coming. Thank you, everyone in chat. Thank you to anyone who watches the VOD. I appreciate you coming and enjoying. No matter how much you do, if you would like to help me out for free, you should leave a like on the video. Subscribe to the channel. And if you're on Twitch, give the channel a cheeky little follow. That would be lovely. If So I will be back on Monday, and I will be back on Monday with a particular thing. We're gonna start a shiny new thing. I assume most of you watched the trailer I dropped, right? The nice shiny trailer I dropped. If you haven't, we're gonna watch it now because you have to watch it. It's the law. Because I said so. And this will be starting tomorrow. Hey, look, it's my trailer.
Rose Smith wanted to become a knight. She trained, and when the time was right, she took up her arms and challenged the goblin cave. She ventured forth into the darkness, only to fail her perception check, fall into the first pitfall trap, and die. That's where her story should have ended. However, she awoke on the cave floor, and in the corner of her vision was text. Text from another universe. Text from multiple creatures, commenting on her every move, laughing at her failure and confusion. Eventually, one or two began to explain the situation to her. They had brought her back from the dead. Her first death was just so funny that they wanted to see more. They would bring her back, give her power, and in exchange, she would entertain them. Rose was reluctant to make the deal with these otherworldly beings, but according to them, it had already begun. She already owed them for her second life. So she was trapped in their contract. She asked what to call them. The text showed names, but there were many, and they gave her one collective name: Chat.
But yeah, so we'll be starting that tomorrow. We did a playtest with Patreon, and it went pretty well. So we should be good to go. Patreons, you have to remember that what we did was a non-canon episode 0-esque thing. So we'll be going from the moment that Miss Rose woke up on the floor. She will be waking up with you guys in her ear. You'll be able to give her her first quest, and we will do our best to do whatever weird shit you guys come up with. I do have some idea for an overarching plot for the whole campaign, but it'll be mostly driven by you guys and what you request and what nonsense we end up doing. I am very excited. It was very fun last time. First quest, invent toilet paper. That can be an option. Can 100% be an option. I'm thinking, basically, if you guys suggest a few things, I'll put up a vote, and you guys vote on what the specific thing is, and then we'll focus on that. Something like that, because I'm expecting a few people to throw things out there. We'll see how it goes. I'm a tiny bit scared it'll be a bit overwhelming on my side, but you know, we'll try our best. I'll just have to take it at my own pace. And it'll be great fun in the end. I had a lot of fun on the Patreon stream, so it should be really fun publicly. So look forward to that on Monday, but until then, and if you would like to support me in ways with the money and making sure that I can pay for more things and do more and not have to go get a full-time job again, because I really don't want a full-time job, so I'd like this to be one of my part-time jobs, then you can do that via I'm excited to watch the VOD. Yes. You can do that via Patreon, where you can get short stories, exclusive streams, merch discounts, and free books. You can do it via YouTube membership, where you get most of that except the short stories and free books, but you also get emotes. You can do that via the kofi, where you can get me to draw some emotes for you if you like my emotes. Wait, Monday? This Monday. Tomorrow. Tomorrow. It'll be tomorrow. Tomorrow. Adventure tomorrow. There's also some more audiobooks in the shop. And last but not least, there is the merch store, where you can get ebooks, first edition copies of books that I've written, bookmarks, keyrings, t-shirts, stickers, and a soft pillow. I will say, you can follow the Patreon for free, And what I'm planning to do after the end of each session is that all the notes from the session will go up on Patreon as a free post. So I recommend I will recommend this after the solo stream as well, but I recommend at least just following my Patreon. Even if you're not going to pay for it, you can just follow it as a free person and you'll get notes for things. Then gotta head for uni finals, so may not be able to catch it live. Well, so look for that. Yes, keep an eye out for the VOD. You can always catch it for the next episode or whatever. There'll be more. But I appreciate it. Appreciate you guys wanting to come. I'm really glad you're excited for it because I've had to do a lot more research and stuff. There's been a lot more it's a bit more effort than my usual streams, let's say. And I've got a nice layout for it, and I'm excited. We have a dice cam. I made sure to have a dice cam because physical dice is very fun. I also asked my DM recently for all the like generators he uses, and I love the list of some of these names. You've got a loot table, which is artifacts locked away to protect the public, which is definitely great. Artifacts of great power, campsite artifacts, curious items, demonic treasures, 80 heart-wrenching answers to I loot the body, what's in their pockets. It's gonna be great. I'm very excited to play it, and I hope you guys are too. I will see you tomorrow then for that adventure. Until then, I had fun. I hope you had fun. This has been Brownie Westwith. I'm the Vin Library. Goodbye.